Hello and welcome to Orchards to Oceans, the Highway 64 podcast. My name is Brandon Talton, and today I'll be your guide along our journey on Highway 64. In this episode, we'll be listening to a conversation I had with Dr. Michael Strickland of Elon University. He's the founder of the Highway 64 project, a professor of professional writing and environmental studies, and the faculty advisor of the Elon Community Garden. Our conversation took place at the garden, and we discussed Highway 64 and what our organization aims to do. Here's our conversation. So hey, Dr. Strickland, how's it going?
Good. How about you?
Doing good. It's pretty nice fall weather.
It's a beautiful day.
It's so nice, yeah. Loving the change of the seasons.
I'm glad you wanted to do this down here at the garden because it's a great day to be outside.
It really is. It's really nice. It's cool weather. So Dr. Strickland, let's start off and just want to ask you a simple question for me and the audience members. Could you tell us what the Highway 64 is?
Yeah, Highway 64 is in its heyday. When it was first built back in the 20s and 30s, it was really an early version of an interstate highway. For some random reason, it starts in Arizona. I'm not sure why it doesn't go all the way to California, but it runs from Arizona all the way to North Carolina, enters North Carolina at the Tennessee border, and runs all the way to the Atlantic Ocean down at Manteo and Nags Head. And in those early days in North Carolina, it truly was one of the early versions of an interstate highway, as it traversed the entire width of the state, from the mountains through the foothills, the Piedmont, the coastal plain. And the highway was intentionally designed, so if you look at it on a map, it's not the most efficient pathway. It wiggles and curves so that it goes through the downtown of many of the towns along the way. It was intended to tie the state together. For us, that highway serves as a metaphor for a previous time when, rather than interstates today, which are designed to bypass towns and be the fastest way through a state, Highway 64 was designed as a way for you to truly see and experience the state and all the towns and small villages in it. So the highway itself becomes a metaphor for our project.
And so can you tell us about some of the places that we would find on Highway 64 in North Carolina?
Sure. The first town of any size that you come to when you cross into North Carolina on Highway 64 is Murphy, North Carolina. So there's a kind of a common phrase that we use when referring to Highway 64, which is from Murphy to Manteo. It has a nice, alliteration and ring to it, but the truth of it is the first town of any size you come to is Murphy, and the last town of any size you pass through on the way to the ocean is Manteo, which is down on the Albemarle Sound, the last piece of the North Carolina mainland before you go over on the bridge to the Outer Banks, and the last town there is Nags Head.
And so with Highway 64 and the Highway 64 project, what are you guys looking to do?
Well, my first vision for the Highway 64 project was coming up in discussions with my classes and realizing, not that it was any surprise to me that 2/3 of the students here are from out of state, but because I think we all know that. But what dawned on me in these discussions was that so many of the students who were from out of state are here for 4 years and don't really experience much about North Carolina. They go to Chapel Hill for concerts, or they go to Asheville for certain events, or they'll go to the beach. But they have specific destinations that they've gone to a few times during their 4 years at Elon. But they've done very little in terms of getting out into the countryside and experiencing the rich variations of culture and food and things like that in the state. And that's where I came up with the idea. My task was to come up with interesting topics for students to research and write about. And so I said, why not have them learn about something that they don't have much experience with, which is North Carolina history, culture, food, and things like that. And then 64 became the perfect metaphor, or the kind of structural backbone for that class. And that's where the Highway 64 project arose from.
I think it's interesting how within an hour of Elon, which is just right outside of Burlington, we have in an hour's distance, we have the nation's largest bug festival. We have the nation's largest barbecue festival.
Right.
We have
Probably the largest pepper festival.
We have the nation's largest pepper festival.
Right.
We also have the nation's largest zoo by landmass.
That's true. Yeah, the North Carolina Zoo in Asheboro is by landmass alone the largest zoo in the nation. And the percentage of our students who spend 4 years here and don't go there is kind of shocking to me because it's a wonderful experience going to that zoo. So I try to get as many of my students down there as possible.
Where are some other places along Highway 64 that people may not know about, but it's pretty interesting?
Well, there are some interesting little biogeographical features. Depending on where the student is from, if they haven't seen the Smoky Mountains, the Appalachians, the Blue Ridge, and which are the oldest mountain range in the country, the Smoky Mountains are. It's a stark contrast to mountains that they may know from their home state. So seeing those mountains is, and the flora and fauna that you see there is quite different that you might find in other places. At the same time, there's a distinct relationship that you might see with that same mountain range and the same flora and fauna you would see in Virginia or even Western Pennsylvania. So exploring those kinds of things is well worth a short trip while you're stationed in Elon for a few years. There's a small place within an hour of here that just happens to be in an old gorge that is kind of shielded from the summer sun in a way that's protected from northern winds. And you go down in there and see trees and shrubs, plants growing that you don't find anywhere for 5 or 6 hours in any direction. You get down into some of the boggy areas of the Great Dismal Swamp, which is only a couple hours away. You see carnivorous plants and creatures that you wouldn't experience anywhere else. Just a few hours drive from here down to Manteo, and there's the whole history behind the Lost Colony. Some of the first European settlers in the New World, and the artifacts and the structures they left behind. Fascinating story. And to this day, we still don't know what happened to those people. They kind of disappeared and probably into and merged with the local indigenous population, which was helping them survive the winter. So there's a range of things that students can experience that wouldn't normally show up on their radar. In talking about festivals, I think there's one of the largest balloon festivals in the world is just down the road at Statesville every fall. So hopefully one of the things the 64 project can do, not only for the students in the class, but the website they create, is just to help other Elon students and other college students at other locations in the state see the many, many things they should get out and experience while they're in North Carolina.
Fantastic. And I have one last question for you, Dr. Strickland. What drew you to Highway 64?
Oh, that's a really fascinating question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. I grew up traveling 64 for a lot of different reasons at different times in my youth. And I've always been a bigger fan of the blue highways over the interstates. And when I moved to North Carolina for my teaching career, I happened to end up just a few miles from 64, and I was doing a research project on Jack Kerouac and found some references in his journals to an incident that happened as he was hitchhiking from his sister's house in Rocky Mount through Raleigh on Highway 64, and the guy, an Air Force guy out for a weekend pass, had given him a ride from Raleigh, and they stopped in Asheboro, and the old gas station where they stopped is still there. It's only a couple miles from my house. And I happened to be standing there one day interviewing the guy who owned the gas station, talking about Highway 64, and it just kind of dawned on me in a flash that that highway extends this entire region of the state, and so much history and culture has happened on that highway like you said earlier, that term you used, a through line through not just the culture but the history of the state.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Strickland, for your time. I appreciate it.
Sure, anytime.
And that will do it for our episode. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our conversation as much as I did having it. Stay tuned for future episodes this season, where we'll be exploring the Piedmont region and the people we find along our way. I've been your host, Brandon Talton, and you've been listening to Orchards to Oceans, the Highway 64 podcast.